Hey folks, this is Riker with a gaming news wrap-up video where we discuss the happenings of the week. This week's topics include massive Assassin's Creed news and Yakuza news. The game series, not the, Some Diablo 2 updates that will have massive repercussions. A former Diablo 3 producer sharing insights behind monster design, and more. As always, discussion timestamps can be found in the description below. But right before you skip ahead, just a quick reminder to ring that sub notification bell to be alerted to new Saturday episodes and stay up to date with gaming news highlights. Diving straight into the news this week, starting with some quick news. Elden Ring won Game of the Year at the Japan Game Awards. And during his acceptance speech, game director Hidetaka Miyazaki humbly admitted, quote, "Elden Ring was not a success in all aspects, and we will be reflecting on these parts of the game to see how we can improve for the future." How can you not love this guy? Elden Ring managed to bring the Souls genre of games to the widest audience yet, and it's really no surprise that it's winning Game of the Year awards. Even people that dislike the Souls-like genre have to admit the quality of this title is deserving of praise. Its open world is gorgeously designed and a delight to explore. In other news, we got a story reveal trailer for God of War Ragnarok, and man is this one looking good. Link in the description for you folks to check out for yourself. I'm just so happy that Christopher Judge got to voice Kratos for the series reimagining a few years ago, so that now we can get even more games with Teal'c voicing the God of War.
Indeed.
We also got this week an Xbox Game Pass reveal trailer for GoldenEye 007. Yeah, you heard me. The old classic GoldenEye for N64 will become an Xbox Game Pass 25 years after its initial release. It's been recreated for Xbox, complete with 4K resolution and smoother frame rate and split-screen local multiplayer that I just brought up a few videos ago as a feature that I missed from old games, so wonderful. However, there will not be online multiplayer on Xbox. That will remain a Nintendo Switch exclusive feature for the game. Also this week, by the way folks, you're probably seeing this video is rather on the long side. We had a lot of news this week. A number of publishers were doing their big reveals. So also this week, we got the announcement trailer for OCTOPATH TRAVELER II, which will release on October 24th, 2023. The first game, which released in 2018, sold 3 million copies. It's a Square Enix RPG with 8 playable characters who all have their own stories. And one of the criticisms of the original game were that the stories felt disconnected. And it seems as though for this sequel, they'll be better intertwining the stories of the main cast. This week also saw the reveal of Pikmin 4, coming in 2023. The sequel in the real-time strategy puzzle game series was first said to have been in development and almost finished back in 2015, and yet it took another 7 years before they could commit to a release window. We also got the reveal of the sequel to Breath of the Wild this week. Titled The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, which is just a coincidence given Queen Elizabeth, it'll release May 12th, 2023. And the trailer includes some Aztec iconography, which I personally find really cool. We also got this week the reveal trailer for Fire Emblem Engage. The latest entry into the tactical RPG franchise has been around since 1990. It'll launch on January 20th, and it features a return of protagonists from previous games in the series. This week also saw some big news for the Yakuza series. Or, I suppose the series formerly known as the Yakuza series. We got the announcement trailer for Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name, which will see us return to Kiryu following the events of Yakuza 6, The Song of Life, and leading up to Like a Dragon 8, which also got an announcement trailer, and will feature Kiryu and Ichiban as dual protagonists. 8 will release in 2024, and The Man Who Erased His Name will release in 2023. Oh, and Sega also confirmed that they are moving away from the name Yakuza. Like a Dragon is truer to the original Japanese name for the series. Bold move to rebrand in the West this late into the game. You gotta really believe in your product. We also got the announcement trailer for Like a Dragon Ishin, which will follow a samurai in 1860s Kyo and is slated for a February 2023 launch. This is a remake of the 2014 Yakuza spin-off game that previously only had a Japanese release. And lastly, Judgment and Lost Judgment, which were spin-off games for the series, are now getting PC releases on Steam after having been console exclusives for the past couple of years. And they're available right now. Now onto some major Assassin's Creed news. Ubisoft spoke this week about multiple upcoming Assassin's Creed projects. First, we got a cinematic trailer for Assassin's Creed Mirage. which was made even more awesome thanks to the amazing voice of Shorer Aghdashloo.
Are you ready to give up who you once thought you were?
I am.
Set in 19th century Baghdad, it'll star a young Basim from Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and Ubisoft confirmed that it'll be more akin to the original Assassin's Creed, with a focus on stealth and assassinations. This one is set for release in 2023, and will apparently be a roughly 20-hour narrative-driven experience. Next, Ubisoft announced Codename Jade, an open-world RPG for mobile set in ancient China, in which players will get to create their own characters. They also spoke about Codename Red, which will have you play as a shinobi in feudal Japan, and is being developed by Ubisoft Quebec, who made Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And they also spoke about Codename Hex, which revolves around 16th century German witch hunts, and is being developed by Ubisoft Montreal, the studio that has made most of the Assassin's Creed games. Ubisoft also revealed Assassin's Creed Infinity, which is a platform that will allow players to access all Assassin's Creed games and serve as a hub to tell the present-day meta story of the series. Now, there was one quirk that came up throughout these reveals. When Assassin's Creed Mirage was being shown in store pages as part of the presentation, it had an adults-only 18+ rating, which could be given for games that include intense violence, blood and gore, sexual themes, partial nudity, and real gambling. However, since then, Ubisoft has stated that this was an error, and that the game has not yet received a rating, and they explicitly stated that the game will have no loot boxes or real gambling. Whew. It's not all good news for Ubisoft this week, however. Speaking to Axios, Ubisoft CEO Yves Guillemot revealed that their default price for their big AAA games on PS5 and Xbox Series XS will be going up to $70. This breaks from the $60 price tag we've had for the past several console generations, decades even. However, Assassin's Creed Mirage is considered a smaller game by Ubisoft, again 20 hours of gameplay, so they're pricing it at only $50. Now honestly, we've been fortunate that the base price of games has not kept up with inflation over the years. Throughout my entire life, games have pretty much remained at the same price, when inflation would dictate they would be at least $100 by now, if not more. Of course, this has led to publishers finding other ways to get money out of us. Microtransactions. And one can also argue that fewer people would have gotten into gaming if the buy-in price would have become $120 for a game. That said, the cost to develop a AAA title has increased dramatically since the 90s, since games that used to take a couple dozen people, maybe 2 years to create, now take small armies of hundreds of people at least 5 to 6 years to create. And again, this is without a commensurate increase in price for the consumer. So that's how we've gotten in this weird place where publishers have to keep buy-in prices low to get sales, but then find manipulative ways to get money out of us once we've bought in. It's like movie theaters aren't making much profit off the tickets they sell, since they're sharing a good chunk of that revenue with Hollywood. It's all the overpriced popcorn and concessions that you buy once you're through the doors. They just gotta get you in. In other bad news, according to a report, devs at Ubisoft Quebec allegedly don't want to work on Assassin's Creed Red because of the creative director. A worker from advocate group A Better Ubisoft allegedly told outlet The Gamer that creative director Jonathan Zumon was responsible for many devs leaving the studio altogether. Zumon had harassment allegations made against him in 2020, and The Gamer's source claims that Zumon has outbursts and creates a climate of fear, and that many devs have asked to not work on Red because of his position on the project. Before joining Ubisoft in 2013, Zumon worked at Blizzard for 6 years as a World of Warcraft developer. In some Grim Dawn news, we got the reveal of the community-made Grim Dawn Season 4, Legacy of the Inquisitors. The new season starts, well, today, and you can take part by going to grimleague.com. Season 4 adds a new act to the game, with unique factions and quests, 100 unique items, new enemies, and bosses. It's effectively a community-made expansion. If you've played Grim Dawn before, now's a great time to jump back in. And if you've never played Grim Dawn, well, check out my video about it, because it's one of the best ARPGs of the Diablo 3 generation of ARPGs. In some Diablo 2 Resurrected news, we got an official start date for Season 2, October 6th. And not only will it include a new feature called Terror Zones that shakes up the farming meta, but also new charms that will break monster immunities. We've spoken about the new terror zones before, but in short, every hour, a zone in the game will become terrorized, meaning tougher monsters with greater rewards. Every hour, the zone changes. So the result is that instead of doing the same farming runs we've been doing for the past 20 years, we'll likely want to rotate in these terror zones as well, which will add some nice variety. Now, furthermore, we learned this week that Sundered Charms are also coming. The team wrote, quote, "In Hell difficulty, many monsters receive resistance to specific damage types. If their resistance increases above 100%, that monster is then immune to a specific damage type. Because there are only a handful of ways to reduce a monster's immunity, only a minute portion of hero builds can successfully farm all zones in D2R. We realize that this can create scenarios where certain builds are unable to take full advantage of the current terror zone, thus missing out on the experience gains and, most importantly, the fun of these zones. If you watched our top 10 D2R builds video, you know that a build's elemental damage type, or types, plus its ability to break enemy resistances can factor into how good a build is at the endgame. For instance, builds that deal magic damage, like the Hammered In, face almost no immunities, and can thus farm pretty much anywhere without trouble, whereas cold builds can be inefficient in quite a number of zones due to cold immunes. Quote, "To promote increased class build diversity, we are introducing 6 new unique Grand Charms that allow the player to break specific monster immunity types while the charm is in their inventory. You'll notice a new keyword below called Sunder. This keyword means that if a monster has immunity to a specific damage type, their resistances will be reduced to 95% regardless of what their starting resistance percentage was, breaking their immunity and allowing damage of that type to be dealt to them. Sunder is applied before other resistance reducing modifiers and only affects non-players. These new unique charms will only drop from terrorized monsters of champion, unique, super unique, or boss difficulty. There is one trade-off that comes with the new unique Grand Charms. While they reduce a monster's resistance, they also reduce your resistance to the same element, allowing you to receive more damage of that type. They have 6 charms, 1 for each element, plus magic and physical. Last week we speculated based on a comment from the team that Hammered-Ins may be getting nerfed, but it seems instead everyone else is getting buffed. One of the strengths of the Hammered-In is that almost nothing is immune to it, so if we give other builds the ability to break immunities, then they start catching up to the Hammered-In. This should have a very positive effect on build diversity. However, I've seen some people express the opinion that this could have the opposite effect, that it's going to further widen the gulf between melee physical builds, whose advantage was dealing physical damage, which almost nothing is immune to, and that now casters who are zeroed into one element now have their greatest weakness disappear. And so, for instance, cold sorceresses with cold mastery that already is able to shatter cold resistance are going to blast even further ahead. But I turn the question to you folks. What do you think? Are you happy about this change? And what do you think the fallout will be to the meta? Sound off in the comments. In some Diablo 3 news, former Diablo 3 producer and current lead narrative designer at Fireforge, Nathan Lutsock, took to Reddit recently to give some insight into the development of some fan-favorite monsters. For years, Lutsock has come to Reddit to share insights and tidbits, and it's always greatly appreciated, and it's great to see that he's still doing so. Now, one of the monsters that Lutsock spoke about was the Dune Dervish, those deadly spinners that are responsible for many a player death in Diablo 3. Lutsock said, quote, "The Dune Dervishes were born early in development after the game was restarted in 2006. Sorry, we're going to pause there already. For those who aren't aware, development on Diablo 3 began with Blizzard North shortly after the release of Lord of Destruction. After the big exodus of Blizzard North talent and the eventual folding of the studio, development of D3 was turned over to Blizzard South, aka Blizzard, and the original version of Diablo 3 being developed by Blizzard North was scrapped in 2006, and they started from pretty much scratch on the version that was ultimately released. When you're at a place with a game, like we were, you need to start making statements about what you are and what you aren't. We were working in Act 2, which we had decided would be a desert, and we wanted to explore some boundaries on what we would do. We began work on the Sand Shark, with the express intention of seeing if we could elicit some more complex combat gameplay in a Diablo game without breaking the rhythms of fast combat. We tried a lot of things that didn't work. We made the monster unkillable in certain states. We toyed with kiting gameplay. It was just too much for what Diablo combat is. At the same time, we were making other desert enemies that would push boundaries for Diablo gameplay. Victor Lee knocked out a concept that got an immediate positive response from the team. Dramatic shapes, thought-through movement, fresh design always helps. and we knew what we wanted to do. This would be a monster who would out-whirlwind the barbarian. If I recall this right, our animator on this one was Channin Thorichit, who was terrific, and he worked with the modeler and the tech artist to give him very specific controls. Though we had access to simulated cloth, Channin hand-animated the draping pieces around the creature's waist. He also had very specific plans for how the character would wind its chain arms around its own torso while at rest, and worked out special animation rigs with our tech artists. Understanding that the big deal behind the monster was the spin, he iterated a lot on the creature's main attack. It ended up changing a number of times, and I believe that we ended up with an intro, looping spin, outro animation that gave designers the ability to change the duration of the creature's attack without requesting new animation work. For context, this is happening in a very art-led way. Some monsters are led by a visual, others by an idea, some by a specific need. In this case, we wanted to create an experience where players would have a chance to attack a monster, but also need to change their behavior in response to cues. Not revolutionary stuff for sure, but we were trying to find the amount of complexity that would work for us. Clearly, we had stumbled with Sandshark, but we wanted to do more than what you saw in D2. More. That is, if it didn't make the game slow or not fun. At this time in development, we were learning what felt good to us and what our shared vision of the combat experience was. So, Channin's work moved over to Tech Art, who really gave that spin all the jazz. They are the ones who do the effects, and if you can make a commitment like, we promise this will always be spawned in the desert, which I hate doing, then they can take that commitment and build sand effects into the monster's spin. They gave the spin all the energy and visual coding that make you immediately say, I have to move out of there. There is a surprising amount of education involved in the visual effects visual language, more than I can go into here, but trust me that these folks are masters and harsh critics of their own work. As an example, I was always disappointed by the bear model, which has nothing under its skirts. FX creates the illusion of mass where legs would be, though no model exists. I love the finished character. Design was very behind this character, and we were all moving the same direction with his functionality. It was about executing a simple idea well, and everyone did their part. The character was visually small, quiet, and vulnerable at first, then exploded with speed and visual noise, warning you to stay away, and then spun down once more. We mostly had it on the first try, but two things came later that elevated the character. First, we got the projectile bounce working on the spin. For various reasons, it wasn't set to reflect 100% of incoming projectiles, but it functioned often enough that you got it when you saw it in action. It really sold the idea of these blades having offensive and defensive qualities, and the creature being immune during the spin. Second, we got the death so right. Julian Love, our lead tech artist, had a clear idea that this character would die in a memorable way. He shared the story in his own excellent GDC talk. As the character was basically a helicopter, Julian saw its death as a helicopter crash. The resulting animation is wild, and is actually a lesson to anyone making 3/4 camera action games about how to use vertical space. I would put it in the top 5 monster deaths in Diablo 3. A very esteemed position. In the end, the creature did cause some frustration. Players do not like enemies to have immune states, but I believe the cost was worthwhile. He nudges the line for what we asked of players, and he helped us decide what qualified acceptable combat for our game. He was a learning monster, and a good one. Making games is technique and experience and economics, but it is also art and momentum and morale. It was wonderful to have this creature come together and be so successful at the time that it did. I definitely see the helicopter crash part of the death animation now that he mentions it. It's instantly memorable, so definitely great execution on the idea there. And overall, the dervish spin animation is probably one of the most memorable monster attacks in the game. Lutsock also spoke about the Soul Ripper. Those delightful demons that launch their tongue at you, then pull a reverse Mortal Kombat Scorpion by zipping themselves over to you. Lutsock said, quote, "The Soul Ripper, aka the Ripper, circa 2009, aka the Thorn Ripper, circa 2006, was a monster that came a long way to finally end up in Diablo 3. This creature was one of the many that we saved from deletion when we moved production down from Blizzard North and restarted the game. There were a lot of monsters that we wanted to keep, even though many of them required work, and I was a bit naive about how much work we would spend in modernization. They were simply creations of an older era, with poly counts, texture sizes, and rigs that didn't match what we were doing going forward. Their animation rigs were entirely redone, their models updated to the point where they were basically new monsters, and their textures were completely reinvented. I talked about the Tormented Stingers, a related monster, last year. As with the Tormented Stingers, the Ripper was part of a family of weird-ass body horror creatures. We had creatures that were born of corpses, mishmashes of bodies, a bloated head that crawled around, and then this guy. His most notable feature were his massive oversized eyes, which looked amazing in his animations, and was very readable from game camera, even at his original lower texture size. Beyond that, he didn't have anything. He didn't have a cool attack, his locomotion wasn't really interesting, neither creepy nor intimidating, and he didn't even really threaten you. Like some of the other members of his family, his value really came from being another freaky deaky corpse thing. I'm not bad-mouthing the original creators of the character because he was an unfinished piece in an unfinished puzzle. He wasn't really cool in the context of the Blizzard North build, and he was less cool imported into the game as it was shaping up at Blizzard South. But I am something of a pack rat. I believe that one facet of quality is quantity. A Diablo game is one you play for possibly hundreds of hours. In an experience of that length, the number of environment changes available in the game, the number of armor looks, the number of monster appearances really matter. Unless I was getting chewed out by my lead designer or art director, I was not going to throw out any assets that were halfway decent and could be salvaged for less than the cost of a new one. Sometimes my estimates of those costs were off, and well, sorry team, but I don't regret the success stories, and in the end, the Ripper was one. I wish I could recall which combat designer to credit with the tongue. This guy had been sitting in the game engine for a few years, waiting for a champion, and one day a designer asked me about him. It might have been Jason Bender, but whoever it was, they started asking what we could do to make it cool. We somehow got into having a tongue attack, about doing a Batman zip attack, and even reeling the player in. The tech art team loved it, and the programmers had it working in less than a day. It was astonishing to see this creature that was very much headed for the cutting room floor suddenly take on this new life. It provided a unique play experience, and suddenly that weird crawling locomotion appeared to be a natural reflection of a lurking, prowling predator, like we planned it. There were moments where we were getting bounced around a lot, and we had an instinct to pull back and tame the effect, but we resisted. Sometimes you need weird stuff that stands out and takes you out of the hypnosis of the combat flow. You need some funny stuff to alarm you and crack you up, even in a Diablo game. I know that is a hot take, but a Diablo game is still a game, and games should evoke a spectrum of feelings and experiences, or else they become monotonous. The last thing I could say about the character is his portrait and the achievements of the game. In-game, he doesn't have much of a face, or he didn't until we got this stellar close-up piece, which I would like to have framed. I'm not totally sure who did this one, but when I see the paintwork of the creature's musculature, I see vintage Josh Tallman art, which is funny because Josh has never painted something as cute as this on purpose. I assume Josh Tallman here is the one referenced in the in-game item, the Tallman's Finger, though some people think that the lore of the item, the Tallman's Finger, references a character known as the Tall Man from the movie Phantasm. Maybe it's a bit of both. As for the Soul Asher, it was a really annoying enemy in the early D3 days. But again, it's also a really memorable one. Lutsock has a real way with words, and it's always great to see these insights through the development process of how a monster is made. I think a lot of people just assume, well, you just come up with some cool looking model, determine how much damage it does, and that's pretty much it, when there are so many more things that are factored in to how a monster is made. And that's going to wrap up this week's video. But do be sure to have checked out last week's video, in which we discussed the unusual punishment Blizzard gave to Diablo Immortal players who bought third-party currency. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider pledging on YouTube or Patreon and unlocking behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. Check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more gaming content.